We're live.
Ladies and gentlemen, please lower your voice. Good morning. Welcome to the first plenary talk session. My name is Alexandra Halana, and I'm assistant professor at the Animal and Poultry Science Department. And today we are very delighted. We have a very special guest with us, Professor Jeff Rushen. And Professor Jeff Rushen is an adjunct professor at the University of British Columbia, at Laval University, and at the vet school in Saskatoon. And he has a bachelor degree in psychology and zoology, and a PhD in animal behaviour from the University of Queensland in Australia. And Professor Jeff Rushen has a lot of research interests, but today he would like to give a talk about practices for handling dairy cattle. The floor is now yours.
Thank you for the invitation. I always feel good about coming to places that make me appreciate the weather in British Columbia. Thank you for that. This is an area that I used to do a fair amount of work in a few years ago. I haven't done much work in it recently, but it's come back in interest. So I'm happy to have the opportunity to sort of go through some of the issues in handling dairy cows. And one of the reasons it's come back into attention. Oh, is that right? Here you go. That's good. Yeah, great. Hi there. There you go. Now, I don't know if any of you have not seen one of these Mercy for Animals W5 videos where they go onto farms and they document mishandling of animals of different species. I find it a little alarming how easy it seems to be to do this. I'm hoping that it's just by luck that they happen to choose the farms where they handle animals badly, and it doesn't reflect the fact that it's quite a prevalent practice, which is always the concern. This is a couple of news items from Chilliwack. One of the later ones involved a very large dairy farm in Chilliwack. And there were a number of issues with that farm, but the one that got the most attention were these young kids effectively beating up cows, hitting with chains and sticks and so forth. And the effect on the public is quite interesting when you talk to people who don't know about the dairy industry, who have seen these sorts of videos. Their responses are most invariably thinking that they should maybe stop drinking milk or drink less milk. And so it's the sort of importance of showing how to handle cattle properly that is brought out by this. I think there's actually a much more down-to-earth reason why we should focus on how to handle cattle, and that is because of the research that's shown that there's quite a strong link between poor handling of most farm animals, but particularly dairy cows, which leads to them becoming frightened of the people that handle them. And this in turn seems to have an effect in reducing the production of the animals in various ways, as well as obviously reducing the welfare. Now, there are different types of ways of approaching this, and one I want to talk about is the correlation approach, which is fairly common. This is where people go onto farms and they take a variety of measures of how animals are handled. They look at variety, they look at various production measures, and they find a correlation between them. A very good example of that, an early one, was done by Paul Hemsworth in Australia at the University of Melbourne, where they visited 66 dairy farms and they took a variety of measures of handling, particularly how often the handlers used aversive handling techniques like hitting the cows or shouting at them. And they took a variety of measures of production and they looked at correlations between them. And they found, for example, that the number of aversive handling techniques that we use was negatively correlated with milk yield. It was negatively correlated with conception rates of the cows, and it was positively correlated with flight distance. Flight distance, for those of you who don't know it, you measure it by walking towards the cow, and then you measure the distance, how close you can get before the cow moves away. It's kind of interesting that almost 13% of the differences between farms in milk production was related to the use of these aversive handling techniques. So farms where they used aversive handling had lower milk production than ones where they used good. And I find that quite a large number when you consider all the other factors that could affect milk production. It's actually quite a large percentage. The problem with these types of studies, however, is that you come to the conclusion that on dairy farms where the milk is use aversive handling, then milk yield conception rates are lower and the cows are obviously more fearful. The question is, why is this so? The conclusion that people jump to is to have a sort of causal link like this, that the farmer hits the cows become frightened of the farmer, and that it's this that then leads to reduced milk. The problem, as I hope you all know from your studies, is that the difficulties of correlational studies is that you never really know what is the nature of the causal link. That's one possibility, but you can also imagine other reasons for this. For example, maybe the cows on that farm have low milk. This makes the farmer get angry at the cows, and so he hits them, and so they become frightened of them. And that's always the difficulty in trying to understand these sorts of correlational approaches. So the alternative to use an experimental approach where you actually manipulate the type of handling that animals receive. So you take one group of animals, you handle them roughly, you take another group of animals, you handle them well, and then you look at the changes in production that occur as a result of your manipulation. And this actually hasn't been done on dairy cows, but there was a very early study done on pigs by Paul Hemsworth again, and they subjected young growing pigs to pleasant or aversive handling, and they found significantly improved growth rates among the pleasantly handled ones. They did the same thing for sows, and they found a much higher pregnancy rate for sows that were handled well than those that were handled aversively. And they also found for boars an earlier age at first mating. And these are the aversive handling wasn't that aversive. I mean, they were using electric prods for, I think, a few minutes a day for 3 or 5 days a week. So you can see it wasn't that, they weren't being beaten with chains or anything like that, but nevertheless, there really were quite marked differences in the productivity of the animals. So we got interested in this and tried to look at, is it possible that cows could become sufficiently fearful of people that in alone would actually reduce their milk production? And theoretically, we know that there are a number of physiological responses to stress that could sort of mediate the effect of fear on milk production. For example, we know that different sorts of stress can reduce prolactin and growth hormone. For cattle, this is more involved in milk synthesis. For swine, this is probably more important. But anyway, a reduction in either of these hormones could in fact interfere with the synthesis of milk. Another possibility is we know that stress reduces oxytocin secretion and increases catecholamine secretion like epinephrine or adrenaline. And both of those can actually interfere with milk ejection itself. So we did a very simple experiment. We're interested in seeing whether cows could become sufficiently frightened of one person that this would have an effect on their milk yield. So we had these two people. This is Anne-Marie's younger sister. This is another person here. And one person was always nice to the cow and one person was always nasty to them. And again, these weren't extreme treatments. We were slapping them, yelling at them, occasionally using an electric prod. And we balanced it so that sometimes it was the yellow person was nice, sometimes the yellow person was nasty. And we did a very simple measure of distance. We just had the person stand in front of the cow. We measured how far the cow kept away, which is a very simple way of assessing how frightened cows seem to be of people or how attractive cows seem to be of people. What we found when we looked at the aversive and gentle handler, the cows kept a longer distance from the aversive handler than from the gentle handler. We then had each person just simply stand next to the cow while it was being milked. So the person wasn't actually handling the cow. And we measured residual milk. Now, for those of you who aren't into dairy cattle, if you cut an udder in half, there's a big reservoir in the udder which holds the milk, and there are alveolar cells around the outside which produce the milk. Okay, if you just open up the teat, you get the milk inside the reservoir, but to get the milk that's in the alveolar cells, you have to have a milk injection, which comes from oxytocin. So if there's some stress-induced reduction in oxytocin, you don't get that milk that's in the alveoli. The way you measure that is to actually inject oxytocin and see how much milk you get when you re-milk the cow, and that's what's called residual milk. And you can see that the residual milk for the gentle handler was 2 kilos in a milking, and for the aversive handler it was about 3.5 kilos. So the cows were basically holding back about 1.5 kilos milk, just from the fact that there was a person there that they remembered was, being using aversive handling to. So it shows that cattle can certainly recognize individual people, that they remember how those people handle it, and they become sufficiently frightened of the individuals that it does in fact reduce their milk yield. We sort of got interested in how do cattle recognize people, because it's interesting to know just how well are they at being able to discriminate people, what sorts of cues do they use. We found, for example, that young calves tend to use the colour of clothing as their main cue they use, so it's easy to train a calf to go to a person wearing one colour overalls and avoid another. With cattle, it's a little bit more complex, and the way we did that, we got a French person and a Japanese person, and if you want to repeat the experiment at home, you don't have to use French and Japanese. It does work for other nationalities, but that's all we had available at the time. So we had this French person and Japanese person there. The cow had to go towards the French person, press on the little bar, and it would get milk. If they went to the Japanese person, they wouldn't get any reward. And of course, for some cows, it was reversed. And then basically, you can do a variety of things to cover up cues. You can make the people the same height, or you can cover their faces. And one of the things we found, which I think was quite interesting, because I often hear that people say that cattle can't recognize people by their faces. What we found was that when we masked the size difference, so we made this person stand on blocks so they were the same size. If the faces were visible, you can see that cows are very quick to go to the rewarder and avoid going to the non-rewarder. But when the face was covered, then they simply couldn't discriminate about them. The point I want to make is that cows can use quite subtle cues to recognize people and to remember that this is a good person and that this person is not such a good person. Okay, so it's very interesting. What can we do about this? And I just want to go through 3 possible solutions. One of them, you can obviously tell people, don't be nasty to cows, and that's important to do. To do that, we need to know what are the sorts of things that cattle like and dislike. In some cases, it's fairly obvious, but there are some things where we can be a little bit surprised at how cattle find these treatments to be aversive. We can identify the situations that lead people to use aversive handling, which I think is probably one of the most important. It's not necessarily that people are bad and hit cows because of that. It's because often they're in situations that lead them to get angry at the cattle and then to take that anger out on them. And the third one is to try and understand what it is that people believe about cows that actually make them use this sort of handling. So very quickly, what types of handling do cattle find aversive? We've looked at a variety of them. This is my younger brother here. This is a treatment I wouldn't recommend, but it's actually, we asked people what other sorts of handling that farmers tend to do with cattle, and we were surprised at the number that said that they hit them with shovels. There are some where you use electric prods, shouting, for instance, and so forth. So we try to figure out which of these seem to be the most obviously unpleasant, and we used what called a variety of aversion learning techniques. And a very simple one is you put a cow at the end of a race like this, You make the cow walk down the race. When she gets at the end, you catch her and then you do something to her. Okay, you hit her or you give her food or you whatever. Then you take her back to the beginning and then you make her run down the race and then you do the same thing. Pretty quickly they're going to figure out that by the time they get down to the end of their race, then they're going to be treated in such and such a manner. And the logic is that if they don't like what they're going to be subjected to, then it's going to take them longer to get down their race. And that's basically what we find. This is the time taken for the cow to run down the race when we do nothing to them. You can see it gradually get faster and faster and faster. When we do something that they like, we feed them, they go faster than if we did nothing. And when we do something they don't like, you can see that it takes them longer and longer to run down the race. And we measured either that or the amount of force we had to use to push them down. And we looked at a variety of treatments. And we just ranked them in terms of how much time was spent pushing the cow. You can see doing nothing, it took that much. Petting them, which people seem to think in positive, didn't actually seem to be rewarding to the cattle, which is interesting. Tail twisting, which is where you take the tail and twist it, which is a common way of handling them. If you do it gently, you can see it's mildly aversive, but not that bad. Hitting them was a little bit more aversive. What we found interestingly was the shouting seemed to be as aversive as using electric prod, which I think everyone would accept is aversive. So it's kind of surprising that shouting seemed to be as aversive. An alternative way of doing this is to actually let cattle choose between the treatments. So you put them into a wire maze like this. They go in one direction, you treat them in one way. They go in the other direction, you treat them in another way. And so you can look directly at the preferences for different sorts of handling. And again, we did a quick comparison of a number of treatments. You can see that they prefer nothing to being hit and shout. Hitting and shouting seem to be fairly similar. Again, shouting and the electric prod seem to be fairly similar. They didn't seem to show any real preference for being shouted at than being hit with electric prod. And we put a lot of emphasis on the code of practice saying don't use electric prods, but we don't really say much about don't shout at them. And if you ever go into a place where they're handling cattle, it's often a lot of yelling and screaming and so forth. So that's kind of interesting. Again, the patting didn't seem to be any more positive. So we haven't found any evidence this sort of patting and caressing that people do to cattle actually is positive for them. Okay, so that's one advantage. One thing we can do is to try and identify more clearly what are the aversive treatments. I think something that's very important is to identify the situations that lead to aversive handling. And certainly for cattle, one of the big problems are facilities that make it difficult to have easy cow flow through. So when workers are working on these large dairies, they're often told they have to get so many cows through per minute. And in many cases, they'll have their paid doctors if it's slower to go through. And if it's bad facilities, the cows stop, it slows down the traffic, the people get angry, and it's then that they start hitting the animals. They're taking out their anger on the cattle. We were interested in trying to understand some of the issues that in the facilities that may lead people to get angry at cattle. One of the things we looked at was, for example, flooring, which is often a disaster area in dairy barns, or I'd say more often than not, the flooring is a fairly bad choice in dairy barns. We looked at different types of flooring. We did a comparison, for example, between dry concrete, some of the newest non-slip floorings that are coming up, flooring that's covered with slurry, which you often see. So we made cattle walk down these different types of flooring. This shows the slurry and the non-slip flooring compared to the concrete. So this is the value for concrete is 100%. You can see the speed of the cow, the slurry slowed the cows down. It doesn't look much, but it is a significant difference. The non-slip flooring sped them up. The number of slips the cow made greatly increased with the slurry and was greatly reduced with the non-slip flooring. What's most important for this talk is how often the people had to come in and either push the cow or prod them or twist their tail or whatever. You can see that was significantly higher with the flooring covered with slurry, and it was significantly reduced with the non-slip flooring. So it's very important to have good facilities to facilitate the movement of cattle, which reduces the possibility that people are going to get angry and feel they have to intervene and get these damn cows moving. So that's the second one. The third one is to try and identify some of the beliefs that people have about cattle that use them to lead this. And it's quite fascinating when you talk to farmers that have been working with cattle for years and years and years. Some of the strange, bizarre views they have. They think, for example, that cattle don't feel pain. That if you hit them with it doesn't matter. Or that cattle never remember anything, you know, they'll forget about it. And a lot of people seem to have these beliefs. And you can imagine that, again, my younger brother here, for example, thinking, you know, cows are stupid, you know, they're difficult to move, I have to hit them, and they don't really feel it that much, they won't remember. So he's much more likely to use aversive handling techniques than someone who thinks that cows are intelligent and that they can move easily if you give them the right facilities. And Paul Hemsworth and his group in Australia have made a lot of effort in trying to understand the beliefs that people have about cows that lead them to use these aversive handling techniques. And they've developed a course that they call ProHand for dairy cows. And the idea is to basically challenge these beliefs. So they present much of the same sort of data that I've shown you, showing that cattle, in fact, you know, are very intelligent, that they can be stressed by things like people yelling at them or manhandling them, that they can move very easily if the flooring is good. They present that sort of data. So they try and specifically challenge the beliefs that lead people to use aversive handling techniques. And what they found, quite interestingly, is that when the handlers do follow these courses, that it certainly improves their belief that cattle are easy to handle. And they find that once they follow the course, then they're much less likely to use the sorts of aversive handling. And they found that it improves the flight distance of cows. The cows seem to be less frightened of these handlers. And they report, interestingly, about 20 litres per cow per year extra milk when the handlers have followed those courses, which I think is, again, is quite impressive, the improvement in the productivity of the animals as a result of the handlers being sort of, you know, re-educated about what cattle are like. So I think it's important that these three sorts of solutions are very practical ways that we have available to try and reduce the likelihood that the people responsible for handling cattle are in fact going to be using the techniques that we know are best for their productivity and their welfare. And with that, I'll end.
Thank you very much for your excellent talk. The talk is now open for discussion. Are there any questions? Do you agree or disagree with Jeff Rushen? Please ask your question and say your name.
Especially if you agree.
Yeah. Yes, please.
I was curious to know if people say cows don't feel pain, why do they
I don't know. I'm not even sure if they really, I'm not sure they're really or whether they do this and it's sort of like cognitive dissonance that they adjust their beliefs to fit what they do. I'm a little bit unsure.
What was the question? Yeah, it was the question. Somebody asked what was the question.
Okay, the question from Georgia was, if people don't think cows feel pain, why do they use electric prods? I'm not sure about that. I was saying that I'm not really sure myself about the link between beliefs and behaviour. I think in some cases there's an element of cognitive dissonance that people use the techniques, use cattle prods and then rationalise that by thinking cows don't feel pain. But there does seem to be the link between.
An additional question. Yes, please. Please say your name and your question.
My name is Aaron. I'm just curious about what sort of observations have been made to demographics, such as international, in terms of the producer's beliefs of the producer.
That's a very interesting question. I don't know there's been a lot done. I know that there have been studies comparing veterinary schools in Canada, how sensitive cattle feel about feeling pain. And people, veterinarians who are educated at the University of Saskatchewan, Western Canada, believe cattle are less likely to feel pain than our veterinarians who are educated as well. So I would guess that beef producers in southern USA would probably be less believing of cases in Canada. Because I imagine it sort of goes along with a lot of demographics.
Yes, please.
I was wondering how farm decision making with large dairy farms in Canada, but the availability of labor for those farms and the difficulties in producers having finding labor, and how that, if that is part of the issue here, how that can potentially be resolved.
The question was how much of an issue is the lack of labour, and I agree with you. I think that's a real problem, and I think that was the problem to that farmer children. It's the nighttime milking, they were basically getting teenagers from around who hadn't really had any experience handling cattle. So I think, it isn't a very well-paid job. It's not a very pleasant job, and I don't think it's a very high-status job. And I think that's part of the problem, that we need to increase the sort of status of the job of handling animals to make people feel more proud of what they're doing. Maybe some sort of certification scheme to make it more like a professional farming and handling animals.
There's another question. Please take the lead.
My name is Aliana, and I would like to know if you think that the transmission of this information is getting easier through time, or what's your opinion about it?
Is transmitting this information getting easier?
Yes.
I would imagine it would be, yes. I mean, I think there's more of it. I think people are getting much more aware of the issue. And there's a very true saying in English that minds don't change, but generations do.
I accept one last question. Yes, please.
Jeffrey, Brian, I'll ask the kind of the ridiculous extreme that if you went to a fully animated system and removed humans, would that make animals less or more fearful?
That's an extremely interesting question. People are often, the question was, as we move to automated systems, will that make cattle more or less frightened of people? It's one of the issues that people have about automated milking systems. And it's never been studied systematically, but certainly my experience and the experience of other people is that cattle are less frightened of people in automated milking systems. Because I think if you look at how people interact with cattle, it's pretty much always negative. It's not, not meaning that it's like, get out of the way, I'm trying to clean, put it on there. So there's very little positive interaction.
It's more predictable.
Yeah. And exactly, the robots don't get angry. They don't get drunk the night before or have arguments. So personally, I think the automating.
So they can slow down.
I think that is actually one of the solutions to take people out of the system.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think
Professor Jack
Well, good morning. My name is Pat Turner. I'm a professor in the Department of Pathobiology and associate faculty in CCSAW. And I'll be moderating session 2, Laboratory and Zoo Animals and Ethics.